Not too long ago, I published a video essay where I deconstructed the ethics of Negan and his saviors. And in that video, I briefly discussed why Rick Grimes was justified in attacking the satellite outpost. And clearly, some people didn't agree with that assessment. So I've decided to dive deeper into this moral problem so that we can reach a more definitive conclusion. Narratively speaking, this attack on the outpost was supposed to be the very first time our group of survivors acted as the aggressors, attacking the saviors before they themselves were attacked. The writers of the show wanted us to grapple with the notion that our heroes may actually be the villains themselves, especially in the eyes of the saviors who are their victims during this nighttime raid. But to be frank with all of you, this moral problem isn't as difficult or complex as some make it seem. In fact, the only reason people even debate this incident is because of their love for Negan and his saviors. Be that as it may, let's set aside our emotions and get to the crux of this issue. Timmy and his merry gang of pricks ran into Daryl, Abraham, and Sasha in the 9th episode of Season 6. They held them at gunpoint and demanded that they surrender their possessions while also then demanding the survivors to bring the saviors to Alexandria. These saviors were out looking for Dwight, but they acted on established savior doctrine. This act of hostility is really the first real act of violence between our survivors and the saviors, and it's a clear example of the saviors being the aggressors. But to be fair to the savior and Negan apologists, these bikers may not have been acting under the direct orders of Negan. It is certainly possible that these dudes were acting independently. But this argument begins to fall apart once we hear the story told to us by Jesus in episode 11 of the 6th season, which is one episode before the attack on the outpost.
A while back, Daryl and Abraham had a run-in with his men. Who is he?
Negan's the head of a group of people he calls the Saviors. As soon as the walls were built, the Saviors showed up. They met with Gregory on behalf of their boss. He made a lot of demands, even more threats. And they killed one of us, Rory. He was 16 years old. They beat him to death, right in front of us. Our supplies, our crops, our livestock, it goes to the Saviors.
And what do you get in return?
They don't attack this place. They don't kill us.
As you can see, the saviors made demands and killed a kid, and then they took half of the hilltop's shit and then subjugated them into forced labor, which is just a euphemism for slavery. Later on, we learned that King Ezekiel managed to negotiate a more favorable deal with the saviors, but the leader of the kingdom dealt with arguably the fairest and kindest lieutenant under Negan's command. I seriously doubt that Ezekiel would have gotten a peaceful exchange had he dealt with Simon or Little Timmy and the Dick Brigade. Generally speaking, the saviors were not good-faithed negotiators. They were predatory expansionists that frequently went out of their way to look for and find communities for the purpose of exploiting their people, because to them, people were a resource meant to be exploited by the quote-unquote strong. We even learn later on that the same exact thing that happened to the Hilltop happened to Oceanside's former community. In fact, they arguably got it worse because all the men in their community were wiped out by the saviors. So clearly the acts performed by Timmy and his gang of cunts was just the norm for the saviors. That being said, Rick did ask the Alexandrians if they'd prefer to open diplomatic talks with the saviors, and majority rule sided with the act of a preemptive strike, all in exchange for food from Hilltop.
Morgan wants to talk to them first. I think that would be a mistake, but it's not up to me. I'll talk to the people still at home. I'll discuss it with the people on guard now, too, but who else wants to approach the saviors? Talk to them first.
What happened here?
We won't let that happen again. I won't.
Looks like it's settled.
And you know what? Who could blame the Alexandrians? They needed food in order to avoid partial starvation. And who could even blame Hilltop for wanting to hire a hitman to kill their excessively abusive slave master? Okay, here's the brutal fucking truth. None of this would have even happened had the saviors not been oppressive dicks. But let's assume you still don't get it. let's presuppose that your moral compass still isn't properly tuned or calibrated. If you witnessed a mass shooter wasting a ton of innocent people, would it be unethical to attempt to stop them, with deadly force if need be? Or would you just sit there and tell yourself that it's not your problem and that it would be unethical to attack without first being assaulted yourself? Would you tell people running from this mass shooter to just negotiate better with this madman? Here's another thought experiment to get that moral compass of yours properly calibrated. Imagine you are running a country and you notice a neighboring nation annexing other countries by force. You then see them launching full-scale invasions on their neighbors. You listen carefully to their leaders' speeches and you come to the realization and conclusion that this neighboring country is operating under an expansionist foreign policy doctrine. Do you really think diplomacy will work here? Do you really want to wait for them to attack you first? Or would you rather launch a surprise preemptive strike? Logically speaking, if you can stop the mass shooter, you would. If you were a rational person, you'd also attempt a preemptive strike on the hostile nation if you knew you could win that war. Or more correctly, if you had reasons to believe that such a conflict was winnable. Notice how these acts are justifiable. Notice how it doesn't take a lot of thinking to reach these conclusions either. Both involve the act of stopping a predator from harming innocents and yourself. If that's not ethically permissible under your views of morality, then you need to get your mind of yours evaluated by a psychologist. And for those of you who are concerned with Rick's group killing men and women in their sleep, simply ask yourself a simple question. Does it actually matter if they die in their sleep or if they die standing? At least they don't suffer if they're sleeping, right? And more importantly, why not ask if this was even preventable to begin with? Because it certainly was preventable. Negan got these people killed via his authoritarian doctrines. Rick and his Alexandrians would have never attacked had the Saviors been decent people, because there would have never been a need for Hilltop to hire the Alexandrian mercenaries to begin with. It really is that simple, guys. Rick was ethically justified to launch his attack on the Savior outpost, but he certainly did so in a haphazard manner that ultimately led to the infamous lineup in the woods. Our heroes bit off more than they could chew because they attacked before gathering more intelligence on their target. So in a sense, Rick was right, but was wrong in execution. Anyways, that concludes this gold standard Walking Dead video. If you enjoy this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also hit that notification icon so that you may be notified when I publish a new video. Don't forget to leave me your thoughts as well in the comments section, and please consider becoming a channel member. It's pretty damn cheap and it helps me to further entertain you. With all of that said, I'm Captain Gold and I hope to see you in my next video.